Live now from Fox. Take a look at your screen and this body camera video. So prosecutors announcing not too long ago here that actor Alec Baldwin and a weapons specialist will be charged with involuntary manslaughter in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer who was killed in 2021 on a New Mexico movie set. Santa Fe District Attorney Mary Carmack Altuiz issued a statement announcing the charges against Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who supervised weapons on the set. Halyna Hutchins died shortly after being wounded during rehearsals for the Western movie Rust at a ranch on the outskirts of Santa Fe. This was back on October 21st of 2021. We have covered it since, and we've been covering this breaking news here. So I do want to bring in an expert to help break it down. Randy Zellin, a criminal defense attorney and adjunct professor of law at Cornell Law. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. I know this is all breaking right now.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So were you surprised at all to see this involuntary manslaughter charge?
Legally, as far as a courtroom is concerned, yes. As far as the court of public opinion is concerned, unfortunately, no. And what we all need to recognize, and I think one of the great values to your show is the educational aspect of what goes on in a criminal case. It is one thing to be negligent civilly. It is another thing to be negligent or to be reckless criminally. And of course, the difference is a matter of your liberty. And the law does not view the level of being wrong in a civil case the same way it does in a criminal case. In a criminal case, your wrongdoing has to be so morally blameworthy when you don't do it intentionally. And again, Mr. Baldwin is not being charged with intentional homicide. He is being charged with essentially closing his eyes. I know that what I'm doing is likely to kill someone, but I don't care. I'm doing it anyway. That's recklessness. And when you have recklessness and someone dies, that's involuntary manslaughter. But it's got to be such a gross deviation from what a reasonable person would do. It's got to be so morally wrong. That's the difference between criminal wrongdoing and suing someone civilly.
And what stuck out to me is that there are two different possibilities here. So the jury isn't just going to say if he is guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but I believe there are two different possibilities that they have. Are you aware of what those are and I guess why that's the case?
In all likelihood, there will be a charge of the involuntary manslaughter, which is the reckless conduct, the more serious conduct. That's where essentially you close your eyes. I don't care what happens. I know it's more likely than not that what I'm going to do is going to kill someone, but I'll close my eyes because I don't care and someone dies. That's the reckless standard. Then you have the negligent standard, which is, it's not that I closed my eyes so I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there and I just chose not to see it. With negligence, I didn't see it, but a reasonable person would have seen it. So it's not as serious as the reckless standard, but it's still a homicide. So with the negligence, it's I didn't see it, I should have seen it, a reasonable person would have seen it, and my behavior was so outrageous, was so morally wrong that I should be charged criminally.
Do you think this is actually going to have an impact on Alec Baldwin? Could he possibly do jail time as a result of this?
He absolutely could do jail time. Does that mean he will do jail time even if he's convicted? More often than not, there's not a mandatory minimum jail sentence associated with these kinds of criminal conduct. Certainly, when someone dies, is it a far stretch for a judge from the standpoint of deterrence, from the standpoint of punishment? Is it a stretch for a judge to send someone to jail? Absolutely not. Depending on whether or not Mr. Baldwin pleads guilty as opposed to being convicted after trial, that will certainly have an impact on a trial court, whether or not the district attorney's office decides to engage in plea negotiations and offers Mr. Baldwin something less and he chooses to take it. There's so much that's going to go on here, probably starting with a motion to dismiss the criminal charges. Again, if I were Mr. Baldwin's attorney, my arguments are going to be, A, this is a civil wrong. It's not a criminal wrong. My behavior does not rise to the level of being so outrageous, so shocking, so morally wrong that I should be charged criminally, nor did I close my eyes to something that was going to happen and lead to someone's death. I certainly had no reason of even knowing that this would happen. And this is where you have the issue of the expert. See, the expert may be Alec Baldwin's saving grace, because that's what we call a superseding intervening cause. It was the expert who should have made sure that there were blanks in that gun. And that may remove all of the criminal liability from Mr. Baldwin, because before that gun got into his hand, the expert was charged with the obligation of making sure that no one would get hurt.
And so after all of this happened, we actually did hear from Alec Baldwin. He made comments about exactly what happened and said that he wasn't at fault. Do you think making comments after something like this could actually hurt him in his defense?
It is always a problem for a defendant or a potential defendant to open his or her mouth in the context of a criminal proceeding. I think that we have to cut Mr. Baldwin a little bit of slack, because I dare say at the time he made those comments, he probably was not even contemplating for one moment that he would be charged criminally. And it may very well be that whatever he said is part of his defense. But if he said something inconsistent with what his defense could be, if he gives or gave the prosecution an angle to go down and investigate because of what he said, then certainly that is a problem. And that's why we as criminal defense attorneys tell clients, shut your mouth.
And on that same note, would you be surprised if we now hear from Alec Baldwin again making comments after these charges are announced?
I sure as hell hope not. Any comments should come from his criminal defense counsel. And of course, there are rules, there are ethical rules when it comes to an attorney speaking out about a pending matter. And just as a matter of smart lawyering, you want to be very careful about what you say in an active case. Listen, when you have a sufficient level of experience and security in what you do you look to, I don't want to say infect a potential jury panel, because that's a negative connotation, but do you want to educate a potential juror as to what your defense is going to be? Listen, you do it from the moment you get engaged, if it's appropriate, particularly in a high-profile case.
Do you think this is going to serve as a precedent for future cases when it comes to celebrities? Because you always hear that celebrities get off easier than just the regular people like you and I. But do you think this is going to set a precedent?
Well, I will gently push back, because my experience has been, and I've represented more than one high-profile client in my time, celebrities actually tend to be treated worse. Celebrities have the advantage of having the financial resources to hire the biggest, the best, and the brightest. But in terms of how they are treated, oftentimes because of their celebrity status and someone looking to put a notch on his or her belt as a prosecutor or law enforcement, or a judge concerned about being too lenient, it's actually celebrities, and history shows us that celebrities actually get treated more harshly in terms of how they're prosecuted, the manner and mechanism of the prosecution, and also the potential as far as the sentence goes, for that very reason, which is I do not want to be perceived as cutting a celebrity a slack. We see celebrities charged oftentimes where a regular citizen probably would not have been charged. And I would respectfully submit that this may be one of those cases where this was an accident. And if it weren't Alec Baldwin, if it was someone else, that someone else may never have been charged.
No, that's interesting, because I've obviously never been a criminal defense attorney. So to hear that, celebrities are treated a little more harshly, I guess you could say, that's good knowledge to have. So one of the potential punishments for involuntary manslaughter is a $5,000 fine. Do we know where that money goes? If it goes to the state, if it goes to the family, is that clear?
Generally speaking, money goes in three directions in a criminal case. There's restitution, which is designed to make the victim whole. Then there is forfeiture, which is designed to take the profit out of crime and goes to the government. And fines, generally speaking, also go to the court system. So in all likelihood, if there was a conviction, a fine imposed does not go to the victim. Now, of course, oftentimes in the context of a case like this, in an effort to get a better resolution for the client, there certainly can be a conversation about restitution as part of any negotiated plea bargain. Having said that, there is, as I understand it, already a parallel civil case. So compensation from the standpoint of wrongdoing, from the standpoint of out-of-pocket losses, from the standpoint of pain and suffering to the family, pain and suffering to the victim. And by the way, I know I sound very cold, calculated, and clinical as we talk about this case, but let's not lose sight of the fact, and I never lose sight of the fact, that someone lost her life. Unfortunately, by what I do for a living, I do have to speak this way, but believe me, it's not lost on me that someone died and that there are children, there's family, there's a husband who no longer has a mother, a spouse, a daughter. So believe me, it's horrifying. But strictly on the question of a fine, yeah, that money does not go to the victim. That money goes to funding the court being able to keep the lights on.
Do you think this civil case, because as we've mentioned, there's a criminal case, there's a civil one, do they influence each other? Does the civil case influence the criminal one and vice versa?
Absolutely. What happens here, that the civil case will provide free discovery for the criminal defendant. And by the same token, the criminal defendant at some point will probably move for a stay. In fact, the prosecution might move for a stay of the civil proceeding for the very reason that the prosecution doesn't want discovery given away that could impact the criminal case. And a criminal defendant can't adequately defend himself in the civil case. The defendant can't appear for a deposition, can't turn over documents which potentially might be incriminating. So what we will probably see is that the civil case will be put on a shelf until the criminal case is resolved.
And right now on your screen, what you're seeing is that body camera video that was released showing the aftermath. Now that we do have a criminal case here, do you think it was strange? Are you surprised at all that they did release this body camera video?
It's always difficult in a vacuum, and hindsight is clearly 2020. Again, at the time that this was released, there may not have been the specter or the prospect of a criminal proceeding. And then, of course, to the extent that that body cam was in the hands of law enforcement, again, the officer, law enforcement, the local law enforcement people may not have thought that there was necessarily going to be a criminal prosecution. And even so, they may have chosen to release it from the standpoint of transparency. And again, this notion that celebrities get treated better, turn it over, disclose it, let the world see what's going on.
What's next in your experience here for Alec Baldwin?
There will be an appearance. In all likelihood, that first appearance in court will be something called an arraignment, where Mr. Baldwin is advised of the charges. He will enter a plea of not guilty. And then at that point, depending on that particular jurisdiction's criminal procedure law, there may be a preliminary hearing where Mr. Baldwin has the right to challenge the proof and for a judge to determine whether or not there is reasonable cause. In other words, more likely than not, that he committed the crime. To the extent that there is a grand jury process in that jurisdiction, then there will be an indictment, or the case could proceed directly to trial once the judge determines that there is sufficient evidence for the case to go to trial. And of course, we'll all be interested in seeing whether or not there'll be an arrest warrant issued, or whether or not Mr. Baldwin will be permitted to voluntarily appear and surrender himself, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I dare say he will be released on bond.
And that's what I was going to ask. Do you think it's going to be a quick, okay, we just take a photo, he pays, and he's out? Do you think he could actually sit in jail for a little bit while we're waiting for, let's say, the arraignment?
No, his strongest arguments are going to be both to law enforcement, to the district attorney's office, and to a judge, which is, look, if I was going to go anywhere, I'd be long gone. I've been here. I've been open. I've been notorious. He's probably had lawyers working back channel for quite a period of time. So there's no concern about him being a flight risk. There's no concern that he's a danger to the community. So I'm confident in saying that his surrender will be worked out. There'll be a date and time where he will either appear at a police precinct to have his photographs taken, to be fingerprinted, and then be brought over to court, or perhaps he could surrender directly to the court. And at that point, he will be arraigned and he will go home.
So now that I know that celebrities, it appears, at least in your experience, are treated just a little more harshly, do celebrities tend to, and I don't know if you can answer this, go on trial quicker than, let's say, your average folk, or does it just kind of depend on the situation?
It absolutely depends on the situation. And as I said earlier, the advantage that a celebrity is going to have is simply the financial resources to put together a team of lawyers, a team of investigators, a team of experts. And the speed of a trial from the defense standpoint is simply a matter of, how am I going to get the best result? Am I going to get the best result by trying to catch the prosecution unprepared, in which case I want a very quick trial? In most cases, that's not the case. Prosecutors are prepared. They have their own resources, their own team. So a trial will go forward when everyone is ready for that trial to go forward.
And do you think, just again, based on your experience, that this will go to trial, or are we talking about a potential plea agreement? Because we know that one of the people who is charged, not with involuntary manslaughter, but a lesser charge, has already taken a plea deal, it appears. Is it likely that we're going to see a plea deal offered and taken by Alec Baldwin so this whole thing doesn't go to trial?
I think it would be irresponsible for anyone to weigh in on whether or not Mr. Baldwin is going to take a plea or he's going to go to trial. We don't know nearly enough about the proof. We don't know nearly enough about Mr. Baldwin's appetite to prolong this and to remain in the spotlight over this and to subject himself to the exposure of what could happen if, in fact, he is convicted. Right now, we will have to wait and see what the evidence actually is. I think there'll probably be a quicker move towards motion practice, where if I am Mr. Baldwin's attorney, I'm going to be moving quickly for discovery, and I'm going to be moving equally quickly to dismiss the indictment, arguing, look, this was a tragic accident. This was not a crime. And there will be case law, I can assure you, to back Mr. Baldwin up, that there is a sea change of a difference between an accident, a civil wrong, and a homicide, which Mr. Baldwin has been charged with. And listen, the evidence will dictate Mr. Baldwin's next path. His appetite for risk will dictate his next path, and his comfort that he will not second guess himself. In other words, if he takes a plea, will he second guess himself that he should have gone to trial? And if he goes to trial and he's not successful, will he second guess himself that he should have resolved the case?
And some great insight there for sure. My last question for you: New Mexico's Office of the Medical Investigator determined that the shooting was an accident once they completed the autopsy. Will that have any effect in your experience on a criminal case, that you have the medical investigator saying it was an accident?
Well, imagine the cross-examination of the medical examiner. Sir or ma'am, isn't it true that you determined this to be an accident? Yes, I did. No further questions. Remember, reasonable doubt is simply anytime someone needs to make an important decision in his or her life, do you have enough information to make that decision? If I go to the cardiologist today and the cardiologist tells me that I need open heart surgery, if I can schedule that surgery, I don't need any more information. I do not have a reasonable doubt. Conversely, if I say to the doctor, listen, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I want a second opinion, that means I do need more information. That's a reasonable doubt. You have a medical examiner weighing in This is his or her responsibility to determine cause of death, manner of death, and to weigh in on what's going on here. This is a state expert, and that medical examiner wrote accident. That's built-in reasonable doubt.
All right, Randy Zellen, a lot of great information there. Is there anything else that you do want to add about all of this before I let you go?
I just think that it's so worthwhile, so important that we are able to educate your viewers, and you provide such a great service by allowing people to become part of the process, at least from the standpoint of understanding the law, understanding the nuances of the law, and having the opportunity to be educated on what really goes on in the courtroom and in the events leading up to the courtroom.
And I appreciate your insight on that, because that definitely helps to educate our viewers. So we do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.